Hey folks, welcome to the channel. In today's build, we're going to recreate a weapon from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's right, we're going to recreate Loki's dagger. Loki is one of my favorite Marvel characters, and his dagger is exquisite. The dagger is showcased in the new Marvel series, as well as in previous generations when he used the dagger in the Infinity War, and he even attacks Thanos with that very dagger. I'm going to be making my version of the dagger with this piece of 5160 leaf spring.
Hey, that looks hot.
You can see I use the end piece of the leaf spring with the rounded coil on it, and the first thing I need to do is unravel that coil. You'll see later that I actually have more steel than I need, so I probably could have just cut this off, but oh well. If you haven't seen the new Loki series that's on Disney Plus, you really should check it out. It's really good. One of my favorite scenes is the "Love is a Dagger" scene, and here's a picture of it. So go check that out. It's really entertaining. I almost have this spring all straightened out. After this, I'm going to take it to the press, flatten it out completely, and then start to shape it into the dagger. The press certainly makes it much easier to move the steel around. This leaf spring is over a 1/4 inch thick, so hammering that out by hand would be a chore. Here I'm starting to taper the dagger to the point and make it nice and thin. This dagger is supposed to be very sleek and agile in the hand, so I want to make sure I get a nice taper on it. Now I'm doing that section closer to the guard that has a little indent to it, and then has little flares right before the guard, so I'm starting to put those in. Now I'm back to the anvil to work on some of the tang and some of those flares. And this is where I start to realize that I haven't looked at my design in a long time. And this is where I start to realize I've kind of missed proportions on this blade. Here's where it occurs to me that I better get my design and actually compare to what I'm forging to. And normally I draw it on the anvil, which I should have done here. After comparing to the design, I'm certainly way bigger on all my proportions. So I decide to go to the press, flatten it out, and then see where I'm at.
So folks, I did the forging on this and then realized it was just too big for the dagger that I wanted. Loki's dagger is pretty small and it's only a couple of hands high. So I don't really want to go back and forge this, so I'm just going to do stock removal from now and just cut it out of this one. I'm leaving it pretty thick because it's a dagger and I want this medial ridge to actually be pretty high to give it some strength, because you can see it's pretty narrow here. All right, let's get to the grinder.
I decide before the grinder, I'll remove a bunch of the material just using the bandsaw. Here I'm starting in horizontal mode on the grinder and just working the profile, getting it all dialed in. It turns out it gets really hot really quick, so I need to go put some gloves on to continue this. Now onto the surface grinding attachment to make sure that this is perfectly flat on both sides.
Here's the profile all finished, ground down on the surface grinder, so I like it. It's very, very stabby. I think I'm going to heat treat it now. It's really thick, but it's so thin that if I were to grind it, I'm just afraid it's going to warp. So I'm actually going to heat treat it now, and I'll do all of the grinding post heat treat. So let's do that. Definitely some normalizations on this one first.
After 3 normalization cycles, we're pulling it out and ready to quench it. Here I'm quenching it in Park's AAA, which is a medium speed quench oil, which is what you need for 5160.
Ooh, pretty.
I've already tempered this knife at 400 degrees for 2 cycles at 2 hours each. Now we're ready to put some layout fluid on it so we can grind to our lines. This is a really difficult grind on this knife because it's so narrow. It's super important to have layout lines to know where you're grinding to. Also, just because it's so narrow, it was so easy to put facets on this knife, so it took a really long time to grind it perfectly, but I think it came out really, really well. Daggers are complicated enough because of the 4 bevels, but with this one being so narrow, it was really tough. This is definitely the most challenging grind I've ever done. I don't normally suggest someone to use gloves while grinding after heat treat, but it was so narrow I had to because I kept burning my fingers.
So here it is after grinding. It's pretty stabby, but the lines are pretty even. It's still got a bit of an edge on it, but I can't take this down too much more, or it's not going to be stable enough. So I'm just going to put a secondary bevel on it. It's a little sharper, but I'm pretty pleased. Let's get to hand sanding.
Even the hand sanding on this one was tough because the bevel is so narrow. Now I'm on the mill to do the shoulders of this blade. I want to make sure it sits nice on the guard. And also I want to have the tang a little thinner, so I'm going to be milling that down as well.
Okay, we got the blade all finished, sanded, looking really good. Let's talk about finishing this off. So we've got the guard to do. This is just going to be out of another piece of 5160. The handle, I'm going to use this raffia that's got the, I don't know if you could see it, the copper in it. It's subtle, but this is also kind of the glow-in-the-dark one, which I'm really excited about, and it's kind of dark, so it'll be good for this. Lastly, this is going to be a takedown, so there's going to be a through tang with a pommel that acts as a pommel nut, so we're going to turn that on the lathe.
I've got my stock chucked up in the lathe. The first thing I'm going to do is drill that hole, and that's what we're going to tap later to screw into the tang. Now I flip the stock around, so the part with the hole is now in the chuck, and now I'm going to mill the end of the pommel. First, we're going to put some layout lines so we know where we're going to remove material. The next operation is to turn down the section that will go inside the handle. And now I'm shaping the pommel to give it the look that I want. After I turned the pommel on the lathe, I just took it to the grinder and flattened out the sides so it wasn't perfectly round but more kind of an oval. And now it's time to tap the hole so we can screw it into the tang.
So here's the pommel, all done. Needs to be sanded a little more and buffed, but onto the guard.
I couldn't really find a picture of the profile of the guard, so I was kind of winging it. And I went through a couple iterations, but I think I finally ended up with the right shape, and it looks really good on the knife. I decided to put these scallops in either side of the guard. Later on, I decided to remove the flare at the tips and just make them taper to a point. And that looks really, really good. Here I'm using the oxyacetylene torch just to heat up the guard, and this is where I'm going to curve the guard quillions upwards. Here I'm welding a piece of all thread onto the tang. I find this easier than trying to thread the tang because sometimes that doesn't work out well, so this just ends up being easier. I've already drilled the hole in the handle material and made sure that it fits well. Now it's time to taper it and make it fit comfortably in the hand. This material was a real pleasure to work with, but it grinds really fast, so you had to be careful not to screw up and grind a place you didn't want to. Now I'm just putting the final touches on the handle, doing a bunch of hand sanding and taking it up to 800. After this, I etched the blade in some ferric chloride, and I also used some oxbow blue, which is a bluing solution on the guard and the pommel, and a bit on the blade actually, just to give it a little darkness because the dagger actually looks more black.
Loki, you mischievous little devil, what are you up to?
I'm gonna take over the world.
Not while I have my hammer.
Oh yeah? Get a load of this dagger. Take that, you He-Man Hulk Hogan ripoff. Loki for the win! Hee hee hee!